Okay, it's been a little while since I did the last film. I have to think of all the things that have happened in that time. I've been working on things and waiting for a few things to happen. So apologies if I repeat myself, which I know I do. Let's see. The radiator shell, I tweaked the shape of it and I've added in little supports here and down at the base that the core can sit on. What I'm going to do is rubber line these and the core will sit on those. I was trying to think if I need anything to actually hold the core in position, and I don't think I do, because this is the top pipe that comes off the top of the engine, and this needs to be cut off here to the right length. The distance between the radiator shell and the core and the front of the engine is so short, you actually only end up with a very short piece of pipe in here. So that's going to be enough to actually hold everything in place, plus the weight of it is sitting on here, so that should all be fine. I have got various bits of hose I can play with to connect everything up. Because I'm not sure if I'm going to use the little 19mm booster pump or not, when I had the core made, I had 2 outlets fitted into it, but I'm only going to use one. I'm not sure which one yet. In the end, I realized that I only actually needed the big one, and I can make an adapter if I want to reduce the size of the hose down, because that gives me that little extra bit of height. In order to do that, I have bought some suitable aluminium bar stock. So if I need to reduce down the size of the pipe from the 44mm to the 19, I can machine up little adapters. That's what this pipe is for. This piece of pipe is 44mm hose. I spent a lot of time going through catalogs to find a suitable hose that was cheap. It was still not cheap, but it was the cheapest one I could get in this size that gave me a decent length of hose that I can cut up to get it to work how I need it to work. And the reason I need that is, if we look at the engine, so this is where the top water connection comes out. Like I say, that gets cut off about there, and there's a short piece of tube to join them. There's not a lot of clearance between the radiator and the engine, so it's not like it's going to be able to flop around. This is the inlet, and you can see that fits on there. And then I just need a piece of pipe that'll go from the base of this into the outlet on the radiator. And that's why I bought that piece of hose. It gives me the right sorts of bends and bits and pieces that I need to join everything up. If I do need to use the booster pump, what I will do is, this one here is just going to be blanked off. I will make a little sort of reducing bush thing that goes on here, and that'll let me run the water through the pump. I'm going to try it without the pump first and see how I go. So I've had people say I shouldn't need one, and I believe they were in Australia, so if it can work there with the heat there, then maybe it is true you don't need it. The other things I've done on the shell, I still need to get a suitable piece of pipe to go in the top that I can thread to put the radiator cap on, which is here. So I believe it's about 70mm diameter, and I haven't actually found a piece of pipe that's suitable yet. So I may be able to get a sort of pipe fitting and machine it down. So that was what I was going to look at next. I went out this morning, but none of those plumbing places are open in the weekend, so I'll have to go out again in the week. I have soldered in little threaded bosses. These do 2 jobs. One, they let me bolt in the fake grill, which is curved to match the shape that it needs to be. So that bolts in from the back. And on the front, there will be the mesh stone guard. Now, this is one of these details where it's really hard to know what's factory and what isn't. I'm not even sure if they were fitted from the factory or if it was a period accessory. You see all sorts of different styles and types and different ways they're mounted. I've seen them where they run inside this, and then other ones where they run outside of it, where the bolts actually go through the outside of the mesh screen. I've seen other ones where there are little tabs and the bolts go on little tabs. So there's a lot of variation there. I do have the suitable mesh, of course. I've mentioned that before. That's my stainless steel. The problem I'm having is finding suitable edging for it. So again, this is one of these details where I'm not sure exactly how it's done. By the sounds of it, most people will use some sort of brass channel, and where it has to go around the corners, they cut notches out of it, wedges out of it, and weld it back and file it all smooth. I haven't actually been able to find any suitable sort of metal or channel that I can use in New Zealand to do this. I did find a place in Canada that does stained glass supplies, and they use a thin brass channel around the edges of the glass. Unfortunately, they don't ship to New Zealand, and even if they did, I don't fancy my chances of being able to get 6-foot lengths of very thin metal safely shipped here at an economical price. But I've emailed a couple of places here locally to see if they have anything similar, but I don't think they do. So I've been trying to think up an alternative, and the best I've come up with so far is using copper type piping. This is actually fuel piping or oil piping, and I just used a little piece of that as an experiment. But what I'm thinking is this stuff is designed to be bent easily, so I can easily bend this to the outside shape I need. And then if I slit it, I can open it up like I did with this one and hammer it over a suitable former and use that as the edging around the mesh. So effectively that would fit on there like that, and I can plate that, and I could probably plate that myself. I don't have a very big nickel plating bath, but I could rig something up so I can plate it in sections by moving it around, I think, or else I can set up a nice flat bath maybe. That's all doable anyway. So this is, I think it's 5/8 tube. I should be able to get some 5/8 plain copper, which might be cheaper than using this stuff, although this stuff I can get easily and it's actually not that expensive. This I just sliced very quickly with a Dremel with a little slitting disc. It went straight through it. There's no trouble cutting this. And that was just done by hand without any sort of guidelines. So I think if I took my time and did it carefully, I can shape that to what I need, slit it, leave it open at the bottom, and then sort of put it around the edge of the mesh. And that'll give me the stone guard on the outside, which really nicely hides everything. So that's pretty much where I'm at with the radiator. These things I picked up today. I went to the tip shop. I'll explain why in a second. And they were just in the piles of junk, a couple of bucks each. I just grabbed them because these sort of connectors and banana posts and things like that, it's really hard to get nice quality ones these days. And there are some, they sound like good quality switches in there. So, a couple of bucks each, I grabbed the things. Let's see, what else? I've been buying lots of bits and pieces lately. A whole bunch of stuff from the UK, a test light. I've been wanting a simple one of these for ages. I mean, I could probably build something easily enough, but the ones you see are normally pretty cheap and nasty, but this is actually quite a good quality one, which is nice. Something I've been meaning to get for a long time. And again, it's one of those things that, for some reason, if you find them locally, they're like twice the price that you pay in the UK. I don't know why. It's, shipping is expensive, but not that expensive. So this is a carburetor synchronizer. I mainly got this for the MG. I did build a manometer for that once, which I still have somewhere, but this should be a bit easier to use. I've been meaning to get one for a long time. What else did I get? I got the proper style wire hose clamps that I needed, and a few other bits and pieces. A bit more ignition lead. I might just replace the wires on here just with some black ones. I'm not sure I like the red and the green, but that stuff's relatively cheap, so that's easy enough to do. What else? So this is a bit of a story. I've been working on the plans for the body, tweaking those. You can spend hours and hours and hours tweaking the plans. I'll probably do another little piece to this film where I show what I've been doing on the computer again. But one of the things I knew I was going to need, as well as the bandsaw, was a decent sanding machine. So I spent a bit of time researching this, figuring out what was going to be best to get. And in the end, I decided on a slightly heavier duty machine from, a proper tool supplier, not like a Mitre 10 or a Bunnings or something, not one of the cheap ones. So I ended up buying this machine from Chevpack Machinery, and that's basically what I got, which isn't quite what they advertise. So if you look in their catalogue, this machine is supposed to look like that. Obviously it doesn't, it's completely different, and the specs they've got here are all completely wrong. So for example, they say it's a 1.1 kilowatt motor. It's not. It's 500 and something watts. They say the size of the sanding disc is 305 millimeters. It's not. It's 230. It's just, these specs are all completely wrong. So basically when I got it, one of the problems with it is they're in Auckland and I'm not. So I think it was $70 for the shipping, which isn't too bad, but I did have to go and collect it from the depot. If I wanted it shipped to my door, because we're technically a rural address, that would have been $200. So the shipping as it was $70, but I wasn't going to pay an extra $130 to get it, sent straight to our door when it's not that far for me to go and pick it up. So I did that. It's always just a bit annoying having to do that, because you have to do it during the day, because these sort of places aren't open in the weekends. So, you have to organize a little bit of time off work and that kind of thing, which isn't too big a deal. But I went and got it and started looking at assembling it. And with these sort of machines that they're made in China or Taiwan or wherever. I was expecting it to be Taiwanese. I'm pretty sure this one is Chinese, because the quality just looks like that. I assembled it all. So here's a perfect example. These are the nuts and bolts it came with. So these are nominally 8mm bolts, but they're not. So that's actually one of my good ones. If you look at these things, one, they're 4.8, so they're soft as butter bolts. It came with this little spanner, which is even softer. You can see how chewed up it got. And that was just trying to do up these stupid bolts that came with it. But it turns out, even though these are 8mm metric threads, which you'd normally use a 13mm spanner on, it turns out they're not. So the heads of them actually worked out to be, let's see, 12mm. So it's an 8mm metric bolt with a 12mm size nut, size bolt head, and the nut, which you can see is a little bit bigger, turns out that's not a 13 either. So a 13mm spanner won't go on it. I ended up going through all of my spanners, so I've got Whitworth and SAE Imperial, and none of them really fit. So that's a quarter Whitworth. No, what's this one? 1/2 inch AF. No, doesn't fit. Turns out those are all basically 13.5mm nuts, which I've never even heard of. So I stripped all of those out. After I've done this film, they're going straight in the bin, and replace them all with proper, better, not high tensile, but much better 8mm bolts all around. So all of these have been replaced. All of these have been replaced. It was just disappointing. The machine itself is okay. The design of it is a bit annoying. So this is belt driven. There's a pulley on here. But the only way to actually change that belt is to remove this, which isn't easy because this guard is in the way and the bolts that hold the guard in place are under this. So you can do it, because I did do it, because I wanted to check out the machine. But it's just annoying. And that was one of the reasons I was looking at that other machine where it's directly driven off the motor either end. The thing was rattly, so I've added some foam in there to stop the guard rattling. I think the spec said it would come with 2 tables. It only came with 1. The table, you know, the little scale on it is absolute rubbish. Obviously it doesn't work at all, so you have to measure it. Other than that, oh, also the base of it is this pretty flimsy sheet metal. I ended up bolting it to a piece of MDF and I put casters on it so I can roll it around, and also just to bring it up to a more sensible, usable height. So I really wasn't very pleased with this. So I paid extra for this machine, expecting to get something a bit better than, you know, the normal crappy quality stuff. But I rang them up, and this is why I've been waiting to make this film. So I sort of pointed out to them that their advertising was all wrong. This is their catalogue. It's all wrong on their webpage as well. The catalogue does say that the prices and specifications may change without notice, and pictures may vary from actual products. The website doesn't say that, and I think vary might mean, you know, the color's slightly different, or it's got slightly different knobs on it or something, not being a completely different machine with completely different specs. That's just wrong. So I rang up and complained, and I pointed out to them, well, this was their more expensive machine. What I got was similar to this one, but this one comes with a decent solid base and things like that. You know, I could have paid $200 less and got a machine like this. This is assuming, of course, that is what that machine looks like. Given how the rest of their advertising works, I wouldn't assume that that's actually what you get. So I said, well, you know, I'm not happy with this. What are you going to do about it? I could have bought this machine. It's $200 more. I think you should basically, you know, refund me that difference, because if I'd known what I was going to get wasn't this, it was this, I wouldn't have paid the extra. They came back and said, we'll give you 100. I'm like, no, I'm pretty firm, you know, I want at least 200. And in the end, they did pay that. It took a couple of emails backwards and forwards to prod and prompt them, but they did it in the end. So it was annoying. Now I've actually fiddled with the machine and tweaked it a bit and changed it. One of the reasons I didn't just send it back, I know everyone says, oh, you just complain and send it back. Well, you can't. I mean, unless they organise to come and pick it up, it's still then time for me to go to the shipping place and organise for them to ship it back. It's going to cost me money, which then I would also have to get them to refund. It's just a pain in the neck. So that's why I persevered with it. Now that I've actually fiddled with it and set it up and tweaked it a bit, it's actually not too bad. It works fine. It does what I need it to do. And I also realized it may be better because it's got the curve at the top. It doesn't have that covered, which means I can use that to sand inside curves, which is exactly what I need to do. So it was a really annoying experience buying it, but I'm reasonably happy with the machine now. It is actually tweaked and set up okay. This I may modify so I can move it down so I've got a longer vertical piece. I'm not sure. This table does move from here to the other side. That's why it's a bit annoying that it doesn't have two. What I may actually end up doing is I've got this. This is what I've been using up until now. My tiny little homemade thing, just with a little scrap motor, a piece of MDF, and I glue bits of wet and dry paper to it, and I use that for metal stuff quite often. So what I may end up doing is swapping out this for something more suitable for metal and making a new table that's just at 90 degrees that I can put in here that gets closer to this, because this gap is too big for doing metal stuff. If I'm trying to do small metal things, they just get flung down inside there. So the table would really need to be further forward. It's okay for wood, but this machine is designed for wood, not for metal. So if I do that, I can use that for metal, and I can use this side for timber. It does have extraction, so this is the other thing I bought recently, is this little portable dust extractor. Again, this is on little casters, so it rolls around, and I've been using this on the sander. At the moment I don't really have it hooked up, it's just held with magnets and the tube, but I've been using it on this and on the bandsaw, and it doesn't suck up all of the sawdust, because of course on the bandsaw it all gets down inside here, and this machine isn't really set up for dust extraction in any sort of way. But if I have the hose just sort of hovering at the back here, it takes all the dust out of the air, it sucks it all up, which is good. So getting back to where the story started, that's why I was at the tip shop. I wanted to get some bits of old hose. So this is a piece of old vacuum cleaner hose, so I can make some extraction type bits and pieces. I need to make some adapters and things. These are bits of plastic, PVC and rubber plumbing fittings. So when I go to the plumbing shop to look for a piece of pipe, I'm going to look for more fittings, and I want to somehow make little adapters so I can, you know, plug the extractor thing into whatever I need to attach it to. We can turn this on. So that works okay, and this thing it's all small scale stuff, but it helps. And so what I ended up doing with the $200 I got back on that, I bought a little belt sander, because I think that's going to be useful too. So the reason I need all of these things is I've started laying out the body, and the way I've done this is, I'll go and show this on the computer later, but I've figured out the stations where the framing actually needs to go, and effectively I took slices through the body and then projected those onto a flat surface, onto a sketch, so I could print out the outside line of the body shape at that point. It's then easy to offset that, so I offset it, it's 1.5 inches, which happens to be the width of the chassis rails, you can see down there. And what my plan is make these stations out of MDF, and I went and bought other bits and pieces of timber this morning when I was out, just bits of cheap pine, which isn't that cheap these days. And what I'm going to do is assemble those, put the hoops up, and then I can check that the lines of the body actually look correct before I start doing anything with expensive ash. I want to make sure everything is correct and everything's going to fit and everything's going to clear. So I pointed out in the last film things like the curvature of the body at this point. You have to be really careful. It actually has to clear the nuts for the springs and things like that. Same at the back. The tail has to clear the rear shock absorbers. So that'll be why I'm doing it this way. To print out the actual plans to scale, that turned out to be a little bit of a mission. So from Fusion 360, you export the plans as what's called a DXF file, which is the same sort of file that you use for CNC machining and laser cutting and water jet cutting and things like that. It's basically a file to scale. What I then did is, I've only got the free version of Adobe Acrobat. I believe with the paid version you can import a DXF and then print it as a PDF. And the reason that's important is Adobe have a feature where you can print to scale by doing what's called a poster print, and it'll print out your plan across multiple sheets of paper, which you can then join together. Because I don't have the paid version and I've just got the free one, I found an online website that'll convert a DXF to a PDF, and I was then able to load the PDF into the reader and print it out as a poster print. And that gives me my one-to-one printed plans that I can then cut the timber to. So one of the difficulties I had with that, one of the problems I've got, is this is an example. This is the shape at the firewall. I don't know if you can even see the lines. So this is printed on just a single piece of paper. I've only got an A4 printer. And this is meant to be printed full sheet. And one of the problems with my printer is it won't actually print all the way to the edges. It's what's called borderless printing. So on every printout, I get about a 1/4 inch all the way around that it won't print on. So to join these plans together, I have to trim them so I can stick them down correctly all together. And to do that, I dug out this thing, which is a guillotine I bought from an op shop near my old house. I think it was $1 or something, and I saw it in the window and thought, yeah, I'll grab that. It'll be useful one day. So I ended up then having to spend a bit of time effectively restoring this. I didn't over-restore it. I resharpened the blade. The spring in here was broken, so I sort of fixed all that. I was missing a handle. I've just put a little sort of metal knob on the end for now. I tidied all of this up. The blade was bent. I straightened all of that. I don't believe these are really sharpened in the same way as a knife. Effectively, all I did was made sure it was straight, filed it, and ground it and filed it until I could feel a burr on the edge, and then I took the burr off. So I wouldn't say it's sharp, but it's a very, very square corner. It's not quite 90 degrees. You can see there's a bit of an angle on it, a bit of a bevel. But once I did that, you know, the thing cleaned up really well. And I can use this to neatly slice all the edges of the paper. That's why everything's been taking such a long time. There's just so many little bits and pieces and convoluted things I have to do. But effectively then I can get a plan like this. It gets, for this size, it ends up being across about 12 sheets of paper, which I can then trim. And I've been using just glue stick to then glue the paper to my thin MDF, which is this, and then I can trim out the lines. So there's a couple of reasons I'm doing this. One, so I can actually just whack up a simple frame and check everything's going to fit and see what it looks like. Two, it's practice for me with how I'm actually going to do this with the ash. So I now know that I can glue, you know, I can print the plans 100% scale on my little A4 printer. I can trim the pages. I can join everything up. I can glue it onto the timber, and then I can cut around the lines on the bandsaw. So this is all just practice for me with bandsawing. Then obviously now I've got the sanding machine. I can sand the insides of things. I can sand the outsides of things. And it's going to let me see that I understand the basics of how to do the woodworking for this. This is because my MDF isn't big enough. I can't do it all in full sheets. I'm going to have to join pieces together like this. This is actually what you do with the ash as well. You need to figure out where the corners go, so you've got the grain of the timber running in the right directions. I can't remember the proper terms for it. I know a friend of mine will remind me after this what they are, but it's something about you don't want cross grain or the way to think about it is if this was a single piece of timber and you had the grain running along there for strength, when you get round here, around the corner, the grain's going to be going that way and it'll be very weak. So you make this from multiple pieces. So you have one piece where the grain is mostly going that way, and then you have another piece across the top. I mean, you can see that's almost straight. So I will be able to buy ash boards, and you cut this out of the boards and you match the grain, and then you join it appropriately in the corners. For the MDF, I just made a whole bunch of these little joining blocks. I'm just going to glue everything together, and I'll screw those together just to give me the stations to see how it all looks. So that's what I'm doing there. The reason for the belt sander, so this gets interesting. If this is a piece of the ash that you are using, because this has got depth and because the body is curved, so if you put that there, you can see you would need to shape this. So what I've done is all of the stations I have made, basically put them at the point where it's the lowest point. So my template, is that the right way around? Basically my template is on this side. So when I cut out the timber, it'll be cut to that width. And then what I can do from my plan is I can figure out effectively what the angle needs to be here. So how much bevel I need to put on this piece of timber to get it so that the panel will sit flat. And that's what the belt sander is for, because I can use that to sand these to get the right angle on it. And the reason I need the belt sander for that is because this timber is curved. So originally I thought, oh, you could just sort of plane it, but you can't easily plane around a curve. So the belt sander with a really coarse belt will let me quickly take off the material to get the right sort of tapers I need on the timber like that. So hopefully that made sense. Basically the timber frames go that way, but the sides aren't square. They need to be curved to match the body. So that's my thinking. I don't know if that's going to work. This is why I'm practicing. I'm not going to make the whole frame in other timber. There's no point doing that. But I want to make enough of it to see that I've got the right lines. And what I can do then is, if I can remember where I put it, I've got a big, long, flexible batten thing. It's fiberglass. It's a bit like a sail batten. It's actually what goes at the bottom of a set of Venetian blinds. And what you can then do is you clamp that to one of the stations at the front of the car, and if you bend that stick, that batten, it should neatly touch all of the stations all the way down the car, and that'll show you if you've got what's called a fair curve, you know, a nice straight line without any kinks or anything. The funny thing is, because I've designed the body first in Fusion 360 using what's called T-splines, those are all effectively spline curves. So it should automatically be a nice smooth curve around that body. So because I've been able to design it from the skin first, I guess, it means that the framing will match the skin. It's not like I've built the frame first and then make the skin fit that, in which case you could end up with one of your stations being completely out, and it'd be quite hard to notice. So that's basically where I'm at. Like I say, I've been buying a few other bits and pieces lately. I had to buy another battery charger when that came on special. These C-Tech ones are really good. That's what I've got on the Austin as a sort of trickle charger. I've been buying other little bits and pieces, like it's just a mount for a camera. One thing I'm quite pleased with is this thing. So this is an oil can. It's called a Rylang. I think they're Swiss. Yep, Swiss made. Not cheap. The reason I wanted this is because I'm kind of sick of the really cheap and nasty oil cans that always leak, and you go to use them and you go to squirt some oil out of them and the oil goes everywhere. The beauty of this thing is it's what's called a double pumper, so it works, it's very precise, probably because it's Swiss. So you can pump out a little tiny bit of oil, and the really cool thing about it is it'll work upside down, doesn't leak. So you can get to any of these little linkages and you can put, you know, effectively a single drop of oil on all of these. I've just got engine oil in it. I just use that as general purpose oil, just oil everything with it. So, you know, you can go around and oil everything. You can see, even just sitting in my shed, these are all unplated nuts and bolts and things, and everything rusts. It's just incredible how fast everything rusts in here. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment, I think. I'll see if I can show some of the workflow I've been using for actually making the plans on the computer inside. So this is a good example of why I wanted to do this with MDF before I do it with expensive timber. So this is my first go at one of these stations. It's just simply glued and screwed in place with these little joiner blocks. The reason I've only got one screw in each one is because I'm cutting these out in sections, it's really hard to get that angle exactly right. So by doing it like this, it gives me a little bit of wiggle in the joints before the glue sets, so I can position the legs at the right spacing that I need. So I did that and promptly discovered it doesn't fit on the car. And the reason is, and again I can show this on the computer later, when you get your outside line projected off the body to show the cross section at that point, I then do what's called an offset, and I add the width of the timber. And when you do that offset, you specify the distance, and you have to specify if it's a plus or a minus distance. And I did it the wrong way around. So the correct line is the inside one. I should have extended it inwards, which is a minus offset. I added an offset to it, which means that's now too wide. But it's good enough to show me that the technique works and there's value in doing this, because it shows me when I'm wrong. And it's going to show me how well these stations fit on my actual chassis. Since my original model is built off the dimensions of my chassis, it should all fit. So barring other mistakes, I think this technique is going to work reasonably well. So the other example of using, the other good thing about using that glue stick is the paper doesn't stick very well. So I think if you left it long enough, it would actually stick, but you can more or less peel off the paper, which is good to know, because when I do it with ash, I can use the same trick. I'm assuming it's not going to stick to that as well. It sticks just enough that you can cut it out, and then it'll peel off, and any little bits like that will probably peel off or sand off. So that's the first one done. Unfortunately, it is wrong, but I'll stand it on the car, because of course the chassis rails do taper in, so there will be a point that this fits. This one is actually supposed to go somewhere in here. I can't remember exactly where, but this is effectively the point of the firewall. So it goes in here, and there's plywood in the top half of it here, and then there's aluminium that actually, there's a shelf that comes out. It comes out and then down, and it comes down here somewhere. I think more or less in line with the split between the engine and the gearbox, somewhere in here anyway, the firewall. actually comes in. So the timber ends here, and that comes down there, and it's sort of boxed in, and then the side of the bonnet, the lower bit of the bonnet kind of goes here. I think this piece is fixed. Again, I have to look at that, but I'm sure all these details will become clear once I actually start building it. This just shows the paper patterns after I've cut them out, and how I can now arrange them on the piece of board. And obviously if I was to glue them down like that and cut it out like this, there'd be an awful lot of waste. So because it's already split into multiple pieces, I can rearrange the bits of paper, glue them on, and cut them out to minimize the wastage, and then stick them back together. Because I've got my CAD model, I know exactly what the dimensions need to be, so when I screw everything back together, I can make sure it's all the correct sizes. It's a bit hard to see with this, but this is now printed out the correct way around with the right offset. This is just to show how I have made the station, the hoop, just from MDF, and how I can sort of screw it together with these little joiner blocks and glue, and there's enough wiggle in the joints that I can clamp everything down and set the width across the bottom pretty accurately, and then clamp it all to the bench until the glue dries. I'll probably leave that overnight now. I think the glue dries pretty quick, but I might as well just leave it. I did have to go in and check some of my measurements, and I discovered that it depends where you take your reference point from, but if I reference to the ground plane where the car's actually sitting, the car in real life is sitting 5 millimeters lower than my model. And I think that's probably because the model assumes completely round tires, and of course with the weight on the car, the bottom of the tires is slightly flat, and that gives you that 5 millimeter difference. So I think probably the safer thing to do is to measure from the bottom of the chassis. So there's the flat floor, I can use that as a reference and measure from that. But I've got things set up. I tweaked the steering wheel position a little bit. Obviously that's effectively on a pivot, so that'll go up and down a little bit. It was about 20 millimeters out, maybe an inch too low. So I've tweaked that. I've remeasured everything, and that new one should be correct. So there's the incorrect one there, but that does give you some idea of the shape of the body and why it's called a barrel body style. It is quite round, quite rotund. So I'm going to leave that till tomorrow now. It's getting a bit later. Here it'll start getting cold again. I did trim the top pipe, and I random orbital sanded both of the pipes just to get rid of all the worst of the casting and the filing marks on them. I gave them a bit of a wire brush, and then just a scuff with some red Scotch-Brite pad, and they came up okay. Getting those on with those little yokes is really tricky. The side one's not too bad, but this one I had to use a long thin scriber and hook it underneath the yoke to hold that up so I could drop this onto it just enough to get the nut in place. So that's going to be interesting. They're all just done up loosely at the moment because they're probably going to have to come on and off again a few times. There's a fiber washer that goes in here, red fiber. I'm going to have to think of what the best sort of sealant is to use on either side of that. There's also another washer that goes under the brass nuts on the top. But that's pretty much how those go. You can see how they fit in. So yeah, I'll just keep going with these, building these. The other thing that's going to be quite interesting is that the chassis rail itself, I'm going to need sort of a plate that goes all the way across the bottom. That's actually what bolts it to the chassis, but that's not flat on the bottom. It's going to need to follow the curves of the chassis rail, which isn't completely flat. So I'll have to think of a good way that I can probably prop a board or something up behind it, and then I can trace it. And when I actually make that piece of timber, the top of it will be flat, which gives me a flat plane that the bottom of the door sits on, and the rest of the frame, and the bottom of it will have to be trimmed to sort of follow the up and down of the chassis rails. It's very hard to see. You can sort of see it goes along pretty much flat there, and then at that point it actually kinks down to go under the axle, which is why that isn't a straight line there. It actually kinks under there. So that's pretty much where we're at the moment. The other thing I need to do is figure out the measurements. Because this tapers in, this bulkhead will only fit in one place, and that gives me that first bulkhead absolutely fixed in place. What I will do is build the rest of them and then join them together lengthways, just with straight pieces to start with, just to get them all standing up in the correct places. Once you've got these in place, it's not too bad then, it wouldn't be too bad then to add the sort of not up and down pieces, but lengthways, forwards and backwards pieces. The next two stations from the firewall one, so we've got this one I'm just making that goes sort of here, and then the frame isn't symmetrical because the doors are different lengths. So you've got one short vertical piece that comes up here on this side, but on the other side it's actually further back here because the driver's door is longer, and that's the post that the door hinges get attached to. So they'll go there. The body is actually built in two halves. So you've got the front half from here forwards, and from the rear of the doors back is actually a separate piece. So from the rear of the doors out to the tail, which will be out here somewhere, is actually a different piece. So you can take the body off in two pieces. The other detail I'm not entirely certain on is when I build the skin, does the skin come down and then wrap underneath? Because in the pictures of them, you can't see any joins or anything. You can't see how it's actually attached. I don't know if it's just pinned all along the bottom and it's just cut sort of flush. I suspect though it actually folds back under that body. And also when you bolt it down, is there any sort of strip? There's probably some sort of packing strip, rubber or something like that goes underneath it. So these are all details I really need to actually sort out, I guess, before I go too much further. So this is my model after many tweaks. I've been messing around with the shape of the body a lot to accurately, or as accurately as I can, match the curvature of the door panel, because that's the one panel I have that shows me the shape. So most of this body is designed around one ancient rusted door panel, but that seems to be working quite well. And if we turn on this, this is a sketch I did which roughly shows where all of the different pieces of timber need to go in the body if you look at it from the side. And this is what I was talking about when I was mentioning the doors have pieces that are different on each side of the car. So this one is for the passenger door, which is only this long, and the driver's door is much longer. So there's a separate piece where the hinges for that side go. But effectively what I did is, once I had where these frame pieces need to go, I created sketch planes based on the positioning of these frames. And because these frames have a thickness, I used the wider part as the sketch plane. And this is where I was talking about how I'm going to need to sand the timber to give me the taper on the body. It's a bit hard to explain, but hopefully that makes sense. And you can see this is the first station, which is at the firewall. If we turn the body off, you can sort of see this is the sketch here. And the way you do this is you effectively create an intersection with the body that you want. So you have your sketch plane, which is this plane here, and you basically say, give me an intersection with particular body parts. So in this case, it would be this panel, this panel, this panel, and this panel here. And what that does is then projects those edges onto your sketch. And then I take that and I created that offset. And that's where I went wrong with the first one. So when you create this offset, you either give it a positive distance or a negative distance. And I gave it the wrong distance. So it actually made the offset on the outside of the body, not the inside. So if we turn the body off, you can see it there. And this is then the sketch that I can export as a DXF, and with a bit of manipulation eventually get it into a multi-page PDF that I can print out and use as a template. So I've created sketches for all the different points along the body, and you can sort of see here, without the body there, you can sort of see the shape. It's almost like a wireform type thing. But those are all the different pieces. So what I will do is I will make this one, probably this one, and this one here. It gets a bit funny in the back here because of the boot and the boot lid, where the vertical pieces aren't effectively in line. So for that detail, I'm actually copying off the body of 8075, which I've got quite a few photos off the inside of that, so I can see exactly what the framing looks like. So I'm going to replicate that for this. But you can sort of see, this is what I should have done on the first one. I should have actually checked that all my sketch lines are actually inside the body. And you can see that they are. So that's more or less how I did that. I could turn these off. But like I say, I've done an awful lot of comparing measurements on the real chassis with measurements on the drawing, trying to get the positioning of everything absolutely correct. I did create this extra ground plane, which you can just see it there. This ground plane is about 5 millimeters above where the base of the tires are, and that brings all the measurements back in line. The other thing I can do is measure to this flat under tray. So you can measure things with, like, if you go to a point, and the drawing, the CAD will give you all of the measurements, so you can see how far up that is. You can measure lengths and all sorts of things. So that's basically how I've come up with the framing. There is one part I'm not certain how I'm going to do yet. So if we look at the right hand side, might be a bit tricky to see. There's actually two lots of framing in here. So this line is the fair curve. So this is actually curved. It's a bit hard to see, and I can't actually turn these off individually, but there's a curved line there that sort of follows that curvature where the body rolls over. But I'm not sure how I can cut that accurately, because it would have to curve in multiple directions, and because I'll be cutting the framing out of planks, I'm not sure I can do that. But I'll figure that one out. That's the other reason for wanting these sort of stations that I can actually set up on the chassis and see how it's all going to work. But yeah, that'll be interesting. And you can see this is an example of where the boot lid goes. The framing here, there's a framing piece here and a framing piece there, which provides the front and the back of the opening. This hoop here then only goes halfway up, comes up to this bar that goes all the way across down to the tail. So that's pretty much where I'm at. Like I say, once I've made the rest of the stations and I've sort of tacked them loosely together, I can see what it actually looks like on the car and start getting some idea of the scale of the thing, and also do things like sit in it and see how high up does the seat cushioning need to be so I can actually see out of the thing, stuff like that.